The year 1348. The birds are chirping, the mud is plentiful, and you, lucky you, are a peasant. Your wooden hut leaks, your diet consists of whatever didn't run away fast enough, and your greatest aspiration is not dying before your teeth fall out. But wait, what's that? A distant cough, a rat, a swelling in your groin. Yep, the Black Death just RSV'd to your life, and it's bringing fleas. Welcome to 1348, where your job sucks, your lord sucks harder, and the plague is the cherry on top of your dung heap. If this sounds like your kind of medieval misery, hit subscribe, because you deserve a warm blanket, a mug of tea, and a sarcastic stroll through the worst year ever. Welcome to the miracle of life, medieval edition. The year is 1348, and you've just been born into a pile of straw that's been peed on by at least 3 goats, 2 cousins, and something that might have been a hedgehog. Congratulations, you are now officially a peasant. And by peasant, we don't mean rustic charm and artisan bread. We mean dirt under your eyelids, mud in your lung folds, legally bound to the land, zero prospects peasant. Your mother is 22 years old, and already looks like she's 50. Why? Because childbearing, starvation, and medieval dentistry are not exactly spa treatments. She names you after your grandfather, who died last week from the bloody flux, which is medieval code for died horribly and messily on the toilet. There's no certificate, no party, and certainly no sterilized instruments. Just some muttered prayers, a splash of cold water, and your older sister watching with the same expression she uses when slaughtering a chicken. You're baptized before you're even cleaned off, just in case God's watching and decides to smite the unwashed. The priest dunks your head in icy water, mumbles in Latin, which no one understands, including him, and then sends you back to your family's one-room hut that smells like boiled onions and sorrow. Home sweet home. The hut is made of wattle and daub, which is basically sticks smeared with mud and cow dung. It's held together with hope and mould. There's one window, a hole stuffed with an oily rag, and a roof that leaks like a drunken bard. When it rains, which it always does, the floor becomes a puddle of questionable origin. Your family sleeps on piles of straw next to the fire, which you hope doesn't kill you with smoke inhalation. But hey, it's warm. You grow up surrounded by animals, and not in a fun petting zoo way. No, you share your bed with chickens, rats, and occasionally the pig that doubles as an alarm clock when it sits on your chest at dawn. You form emotional attachments to the livestock because they're the only ones who don't yell at you. Then one day they're dinner. Lesson learned, don't name the goat. Your village is tiny, a loose collection of hovels, a church, a well, and a lot of mud. The kind of place where everyone knows your name, your father's name, and what your mother screamed during childbirth. There are no secrets here. Everyone smells vaguely of smoked fish and unfulfilled dreams. And no, you can't leave. You're a serf, which means you're legally tied to this land like a pair of cursed medieval crocs. The local lord owns you, not in the he technically owns your labor kind of way, but in the he literally decides who you marry and how many chickens you owe him at Easter kind of way. The concept of personal freedom, adorable, we'll file that next to unicorns and effective medieval medicine. Your education begins around the age of 4, and by education we mean learning how not to get kicked by a cow. You're taught to thatch roofs, weed fields, and haul water from the well without spilling it, a skill that ranks just below alchemy in difficulty. Reading is for priests, nobles, and the occasional literate goat. Writing? That's witchcraft. By 6, you're working in the fields. By 10, you've pulled more weeds than a modern suburban HOA committee. By 12, your hands look like aged leather, and your spine has begun its slow but steady arc toward permanently hunched. But on the plus side, you now understand the weather with frightening accuracy. You can smell rain 2 days away, and you know when a frost is coming just by the way the frogs sound. Call it peasant superpower. Your family survives on what the land grudgingly provides: barley, turnips, and the occasional tragic-looking cabbage. If there's a good harvest, you get to eat. If not, you get to pray. But not too loudly. That's how people end up accused of heresy. And then there's the manor, that big stone building on the hill, that looks like something out of a discount fairy tale. The Lord lives there, wrapped in furs, eating meat daily, sipping wine, and complaining about how lazy the peasants are. You know, the person who hasn't had a full stomach since Tuesday. You owe him taxes, labor, and your firstborn's ability to stack hay. He, in turn, owes you Absolutely nothing. So what does a peasant dream about? Not castles, not glory, not even shoes. No, your biggest dream is owning a second tunic, because your current one is mostly holes and memories. And maybe, just maybe, a winter where no one dies of dysentery. Aim high. Sometimes you hear stories from passing travelers, wild tales of cities with stone buildings, of books and markets, and people who can count past 20. You wonder if they're true. But deep down, you know you'll never see them. Your life is the village, and it always will be. But here's the thing, no one ever tells you. Peasants ran the entire machine. You tilled the soil, fed the kingdom, raised the children, and built the roads. Sure, you were invisible to the people writing history, but you were the reason it kept moving, even in the mud, even in the rain. So yeah, you're a peasant. Congrats. Let that sink in, dust, dung and all. Rise and shine. Or don't. The sun doesn't care. It's already dragging itself over the horizon like a reluctant blacksmith. And so must you. There are no roosters crowing dramatically on your windowsill. Mostly because that rooster was eaten last week. What you do have is your father kicking your feet and muttering something about barley and laziness. Welcome to your morning routine, 3048 style, no alarm clock, no snooze button, just guilt and frostbite. You peel yourself off the straw pile, you call a bed. Your tunic, which is also your nightgown, work uniform and formal wear, is damp from either condensation, livestock, or dreams, best not investigated. Your breath fogs in the freezing air. It's spring, technically, which in medieval England means it's only mostly miserable. Your first task of the day is locating your left shoe. Spoiler, the pig was using it as a pillow. Breakfast is optimistic. If you're lucky, there's some leftover pottage that is medieval gruel, made from yesterday's gruel, recycled like a sad, edible family heirloom. More often than not, it's a cold hunk of barley bread, so dense it could be used as a weapon in a peasant uprising. You choke it down while squatting near the hearth. The fire's out. Of course it is. Outside, the village is already alive with the familiar soundtrack. Clanking buckets, hacking coughs, and the sweet morning wail of someone realizing their sheep escaped. Again, you trudge through the mud toward the fields, which, thanks to the charmingly consistent English rain, have become a vast expanse of sludge that's part soil, part soup. Your boots, the ones patched with twine, tears and prayers, are immediately swallowed. Today's job is weeding barley. Again, it's always weeding. Or hauling. Or mending a fence that goats have made their life's mission to destroy. There is no day off. There is only hope you're not needed elsewhere. Even feast days involve work, just slightly more fermented. Your foreman, called the Reeve, arrives right on time to yell at you for existing too slowly. He's another peasant, but one who gets to boss the rest around because he's slightly more literate and marginally less likable. He tells you your row isn't straight. You silently resist the urge to bludgeon him with a hoe. Barely. As the hours drag by, your muscles ache with the kind of fatigue that doesn't even register as pain anymore. Just an ambient buzz, like background music. Only it's your spine screaming. You work with your head down, trying to ignore the smell of manure, sweat and regret. You know what nobody talks about in medieval history books? How your fingers never stop being cold, even in July. Midday brings a break. Not by design, but because your stomach has started to file formal complaints. Lunch is a chunk of bread with a smear of lard, or, if your family is feeling fancy, an onion. You eat while squatting in the shade of a hedge, listening to another peasant explain why he thinks the moon controls turnip growth. You nod like that makes sense, because why not? Nothing else does. After lunch, it's back to the grind. You chase pigs, stack hay, and narrowly avoid being crushed by an ox cart, whose driver is extremely casual about brakes, because they don't exist. Your younger sibling shows up with a message from your mother. She needs help hauling water from the well. The bucket rope snapped again. Of course it did. You make your way to the village well, passing houses that look like they were constructed by someone who briefly met a carpenter, and then immediately forgot everything. The well itself is lined with slimy stone, and the water tastes like wet iron and despair. Still, it's better than nothing. You fill the buckets, hoist them over your shoulders, and begin the slow, back-breaking march home. Your knees have begun writing their own sad ballads in protest. Sometimes, if you're lucky, the weather turns dramatic. Thunderclouds rolling in like angry nobles. You look up, briefly hopeful for a break, But no, the reeve insists the barley likes the rain. You, however, do not. You keep working while water trickles down your neck, and into places no water should ever go. Let that sink in, every miserable drop. You daydream while you work. Maybe someday, you'll be the one giving orders. Maybe you'll grow something other than barley. Maybe, just maybe, the next village over is less awful. You'll never know. You've never been there. And then comes the inevitable. Someone collapses. Heat stroke, exhaustion, or the mysterious medieval disease known as wasting sickness, which is really just code for we have no idea, and it's probably fatal. Everyone stops, watches, shrugs, and keeps working, unless you're on fire or literally decapitated. There's no such thing as sick leave. Nightfall arrives like a mercy. The sun disappears behind the trees, and the air turns cold enough to make your bones regret their existence. You drag yourself home, smelling like sweat, wet wool, and hay mold. Your hands are blistered, your back is howling, and you've somehow managed to get straw in your undergarments. Again, dinner is more gruel. Conversation is minimal. Your parents are already asleep. Your siblings snore in a pile like medieval puppies, and the pig is eyeing your bed spot. You push it aside and collapse onto the straw, too tired to think, too sore to dream. And then the next morning you do it all over again. Because in 1348, life isn't about thriving, it's about surviving. And if you're lucky, surviving long enough to pass this whole mess on to your children. Sleep time. Let's set the table. And by table we mean a wobbly plank of wood, propped on 2 barrels, stained with the ghosts of turnips past. Welcome to dinner in 1348, a daily exercise in disappointment. The ambiance? Dim firelight and the soothing sound of someone coughing in the corner. The centerpiece? A bowl of something hot, brown and suspiciously viscous. Is it food? Technically. Is it enjoyable? That's adorable. This evening's delicacy is pottage, a medieval dish so flexible it can be made from literally anything. Cabbage, barley, peas, weeds, shoe leather, hope. It's the culinary equivalent of shrugging. Pottage is both the main course, and depending on how long you keep boiling it, breakfast. It's been on the fire for 3 days. Every now and then someone throws something new in. It's like soup, if soup had given up on itself. You scoop your portion into a wooden bowl that's been chewed on by something with tiny teeth. There are floaty bits, maybe leek, maybe moss. You eat quickly because if you stop to breathe, someone else might claim your portion. Your younger brother, eyes locked on your spoon, is already doing the mental math. Next to the pottage sits a loaf of bread, and we use the word bread generously. Medieval bread is dense, dark, and baked with flour that may or may not contain crushed bark, errant pebbles, or something that used to be a beetle. Your teeth don't slice into it so much as bounce off it like a siege weapon. This is marslan bread, a glorious blend of barley and rye that your ancestors somehow mistook for nourishment. Want white bread? That's adorable. That's for rich people, or the clergy, or dream. On rare occasions, you might add a sprinkle of salt. It's stored in a little pouch, and guarded like it's the crown jewels. Salt is expensive, imported, and often full of sand. You crunch through it anyway, because flavor in this century is relative. You once licked a rock, because it had a hint of garlic. True story. Now you might be wondering, what about meat? Oh, sweet summer child. Meat exists, sure, but not for you. Pigs, chickens and cattle are assets, not in tray, unless one dies of natural causes, like falling into a ditch or accidentally being stabbed with a pitchfork. They're usually sold, not served. But let's say a miracle occurs. The pig keels over from pig flu. You roast it, celebrate it, and savor it down to the bone. The bones, by the way, are used for broth. The broth is used for more pottage. The circle of culinary life. If you're daring, or just desperate, you might forage wild garlic, mushrooms, berries, and the occasional plant that causes hallucinations, and possibly death. Your grandmother insists it's good for the lungs. Your cousin tried it, and now talks to trees. Still, it's better than going hungry. Vegetables are seasonal, and by seasonal, we mean when the frost hasn't murdered everything. Root vegetables, carrots, onions, parsnips are common enough, but they're small, bitter, and look like they've been cursed. Fruit, luxury, unless you count dried apples your aunt hung in the rafters 6 months ago. You do, because options are thin. For drink, you've got ale, not the foamy pub-worthy kind. Medieval ale is flat, warm, and mildly fermented. Just enough to kill the bacteria, but not enough to make you forget your existence. Water is risky. The well may be clean, or it may contain the spiritual remnants of someone who fell in last spring. You don't take chances. Milk? Only when the cow's not pregnant, sick, or stolen. And even then, it's warm, unfiltered, and comes with floaters. You sip it with the same enthusiasm you'd reserve for gargling pond scum. And what about utensils, you ask? Forks are exotic. Spoons are common, but often shared. You eat with your hands, your bread, or your relative's spoon when they're not looking. Table manners are basic. Don't spit into the communal bowl. Don't pickle ice while chewing. And please stop scratching that rash near the firewood. As you eat, there's conversation, sort of. Someone mumbles about a sick ox. Someone else talks about the Lord's latest tax. Your uncle tells the story of a goose that exploded after eating fermented oats. Everyone laughs, not because it's funny, but because the alternative is remembering your life. Meals are brief. Food is fuel. There's no dessert unless you count stewed prunes or vague disappointment. On holy days you might get fish, usually dried, salted, beyond recognition, and chewy enough to require dental surgery. Fun fact, the church said you shouldn't eat meat on Fridays, so everyone got creative. Beaver tails were declared fish for loophole reasons. You haven't seen a beaver, but you're told it tastes like redemption and algae. You scrape the last of your pottage, watching your siblings lick their bowls with the enthusiasm of starving raccoons. The fire sputters. Someone farts. The pig snores. Dinner is over. And yet, somehow, there's comfort in the ritual. The firelight, the sound of slurping, the bitter bread, shared by bitter people who are, against all odds, still here, still eating, still surviving. And if that means another helping of beige sadness tomorrow, so be it. So yeah, dinner is beige, but beige keeps you alive. Let's take a deep breath, if you dare, because in the year 1348, fresh air is a rare commodity, and the smell of your village can best be described as haunting. It's a swirling bouquet of manure, mildew, sweat, smoke, and a mysterious tang that might be fermented turnip or death. Hard to say. Hygiene, as a concept, hasn't quite been invented yet. You do wash occasionally, mostly your hands. And by wash we mean you splash some vaguely brown water on your fingers before dinner, mostly for show. Soap is a luxury, like gold or functional shoes. The local version is lye-based, smells like rotten eggs, and leaves your skin feeling like it's been sanded. You use it sparingly, if at all. Baths? Oh yes, you've heard of those. Your grandmother talks about her annual one fondly, like a distant cousin who moved to the city and sends letters. Most peasants bathe once or twice a year. Usually in spring when the weather stops trying to kill you. You undress behind a bush, dunk yourself in a stream, scrub your armpits with grass, and call it divine. In winter, bathing becomes a form of torture. There's no hot water unless someone's feeling ambitious enough to stoke the fire, boil a pot, and not burn the cottage down in the process. You generally opt to stay crusty and hope the cold numbs your shame. Hair care is straightforward. You have hair, you let it grow. You might own a comb, made of wood or bone, which you use to redistribute lice evenly among family members. Delousing is a group activity, a bonding moment where relatives sit by the fire and pop parasites like bubble wrap. The sound is oddly satisfying. And speaking of infestations, fleas. They're everywhere. In your bed, in your clothes, in places too personal to discuss over soup. You share them with your animals, who occasionally return the favor with worms. There's a constant, itchy reminder that you are part of a very vibrant, mobile ecosystem. Your clothes do get washed, sort of. They're dunked in cold water, beaten with sticks, and dried on a hedge. Soap is optional, stains are permanent, smells are ignored. Underwear, if you even have any, is rotated on a bi-weekly basis, or until it becomes sentient, whichever comes first. Now, let's talk teeth. If you have more than half of yours, you're basically a noble. Tooth care in 3048 consists of hope, superstition, and the occasional stick. You chew twigs to clean your mouth, spit into the fire for luck, and pray your molars don't betray you mid-turnip. Cavities are treated by yanking the offending tooth with pliers, or whatever vaguely pointy thing the village blacksmith isn't currently using on a horseshoe. Gum disease? That's just how mouths look. Breath? Don't worry, everyone's is equally tragic. And you're not going to find any mint sprigs around here. If you really want to freshen up, chew some parsley, or just stop breathing near people. Your skin tells its own story, mostly in calluses, sunburns, rashes, and unidentifiable spots. You're permanently tanned, not from a holiday in Spain, but from years of UV exposure without sunscreen, hats, or dignity. You itch constantly, scratch shamelessly, and develop a high tolerance for boils. Rashes are common, remedies are creative. Got red spots? Rub them with garlic. Itchy bumps? Smear on honey. Open sores? Burn them shut with a hot poker. Some villagers swear by leeches, others pray to saints. Most just accept that skin is temporary. What's that on your leg? Could be a mole. Could be plague. Let's not dwell. And the toilets? Oh, the toilets. Or rather, the complete absence of them. Your family uses a pit latrine out back, which is essentially a hole in the ground with a wooden plank over it, and a colony of flies the size of grapes. In winter, the hole freezes. In summer, it bubbles. Sometimes you use the bushes instead. Sometimes the bushes use you. To wipe, you grab whatever's nearby. Leaves, moss, an unfortunate rabbit. There's no toilet paper. That won't be invented for centuries. And even then, it's for emperors. You get bark. Maybe straw, if you're feeling fancy. To manage waste, you throw it in the midden, the communal pile of everything disgusting. Food scraps, broken tools, animal bones, and bodily refuse all stew together in a corner of the village that has legally declared war on the nose. Children play nearby, sometimes in it, because they're children, and because boredom is stronger than reason. Now, disease. Here's the fun part. People believe illness comes from bad smells. This is the miasma theory, the idea that foul air causes sickness. So when someone gets sick, you try to overpower the smell with stronger smells. Herbs, incense, crushed flowers, all packed into little cloth bags and hung around the neck like stinky amulets. Meanwhile, the actual cause, bacteria from that cesspool you call a latrine, continues its happy rampage. There are no germs in 3048. Not because they don't exist, but because you don't know they exist. The only thing microscopic in your world is your chance of survival past 40. Still, you make do. You scrape the dirt from your fingernails with a knife. You change your tunic once a month. You rinse your feet in rainwater. And if someone really smells bad, you politely sit upwind and don't ask questions. Despite it all, you carry on, covered in dust, coated in grime, surrounded by smells that cling to your soul, because this is your life, and in some strange, horrifying way, it works. Sort of. So yeah, hygiene is a myth. But resilience? That's real. Love in the year 1348. It smells like goat sweat, sounds like coughing, and arrives just in time to ruin your adolescence. You're 14 now, old enough to marry, breed, and begin the slow-motion tragedy that is adult peasant life. Childhood was brief, itchy, and full of chores. Now comes marriage, childbirth, and existential dread. In that order. Let's be clear. You don't marry for love. Love is a luxury item, like fur cloaks or second helpings. You marry because your family needs another body in the hut to stir pottage and raise more children to work the fields. Romance? That's for ballads and nobles. You get a spouse who's available, vaguely related to someone trustworthy, and has both eyes pointing in the same direction, if you're lucky. Your betrothed, let's call her Maud, is 13, and already knows how to cook, clean, thatch a roof, skin a rabbit, and survive a winter with just pickled cabbage and crushed dreams. Her dowry includes a hen, a chipped wooden bowl, and a stern warning from her mother about bedroom duties. You, meanwhile, bring to the union a pair of calloused hands and a deep well of confusion. The ceremony is short. A priest mumbles in Latin. You nod at the right times, and someone pours ale into an empty turnip to celebrate. There's no cake, no dancing, no fireworks, just awkward glances, mild nausea, and the overwhelming awareness that you now share a mattress and a future. That first night is not romantic. Your hut has no doors, no privacy, and at least one of your siblings is watching with intense curiosity. The straw pokes you in ways straw should never poke, and you're not entirely sure which end of your new spouse is which in the dark. There's a lot of shuffling, apologizing, and a moment where the pig accidentally joins in. It's memorable. Within a few months, Maud is pregnant. Again, no one explains anything, except for the local midwife, who appears uninvited and offers advice that involves onions, whispering to bees, and something about hanging garlic above the bed. You nod, smile, and pretend this makes sense. Pregnancy in 3048 is less of a miracle, and more of a prolonged medical emergency. There are no doctors, no prenatal vitamins, and no understanding of anatomy beyond something's growing in there. Hope it doesn't kill you. Maud works through it all, hauling water, baking bread, digging in the garden, right up until she can't bend over without tipping. When the time comes, she gives birth on a pile of old linens while her mother, the midwife, and your panicking younger sister shout conflicting instructions. There's no screaming in movies, because there are no movies. But if there were, this would be a horror film. The baby arrives purple, squalling, and slippery. Everyone cheers. No one sleeps. You now have a child. His name is probably John, or Thomas, or some variation of a biblical name used by half the village. He cries constantly, pees like a fountain, and requires more attention than you thought a bundle of potatoes with fingers could ever demand. Infant mortality is high. Everyone knows someone who lost a baby last winter. You bury them quietly, without names, near the churchyard, beneath a crooked wooden cross. But you keep trying, because that's what people do. They marry, they breed, they bury. They begin again. Sex continues. Not because it's glamorous, but because it's expected. There's no such thing as contraception. Well, not effective contraception. You've heard rumors about certain herbs and moon cycles, but mostly you just roll the dice and hope. The church says, sex is only for procreation. The village says, sure, but also it's cold and we're bored. You and Maud develop a rhythm, one that includes raising chickens, keeping children alive, and occasionally making more children when the mood strikes and the pig's not watching. It's not romantic, but it's real. A partnership forged in smoke, sweat, and mutual survival. Affairs happen. So does gossip. That's just village life. A smirk, a glance, a barn that stays locked a little too long. It all fuels the local drama. But mostly, people are too tired for scandal. Adultery is technically illegal, but so is fishing on Sundays, and we all know how seriously that's enforced. The emotional side of marriage? Complicated. You may come to care for Maud, not in a grand sweeping writer sonnets way, but in a quiet, I fix the roof so you don't get rained on kind of way. You sit together in the evenings watching the fire die, trading stories about who got kicked by which cow. There's comfort in that. Sometimes you argue about chores, about money, about whose turn it is to chase the goose. But no one leaves. There's nowhere to go. Divorce isn't a thing. You're stuck, and somehow that makes you try harder, or just get really good at passive-aggressive bread making. By your mid-20s, you've got 3 children, a bad knee, and an appreciation for nights when no one vomits. You've also developed a strange tenderness for your spouse, the kind that's built on shared hardship and the occasional stolen moment of peace, like watching your youngest take his first steps while your eldest proudly declares he caught a rat all by himself. It's not a fairy tale, but it's yours. So yeah, love in 3048 is muddy, itchy and loud. But sometimes, in the quiet moments, it's also something else. Real. Sunday morning. You wake up stiff cold and vaguely hungry, so basically like every other day, but this one's different. Today, you put on your good tunic, the one with fewer patches and only one hole in an awkward place. Why? Because it's time to go to church. Your weekly appointment with guilt, judgment, and the vague hope that if you kneel hard enough, maybe the crops won't die. The village church stands at the center of your muddy little world. It's the biggest stone building you've ever seen, and also the draftiest. Inside, it smells like damp straw, candle wax, and centuries of whispered confessions. You step through the doorway, dip your fingers in the holy water, try not to think about who else touched it, and take your place on a hard wooden bench that hasn't known comfort since the Norman conquest. The priest arrives in a faded robe that used to be white, carrying the weight of Latin incense and mild contempt. His sermons are long, mostly incomprehensible, and delivered with all the enthusiasm of a man who's been living celibate in a village of sheep for 20 years. You nod along anyway because he's the one who decides whether your soul goes to heaven or into the hellfire pit full of screaming tax collectors. You don't speak Latin. No one does, really. The priest might, or he might just be muttering something about mutton in a mystical tone. Either way, the message is clear: you are a sinner. Probably, almost definitely. Did you have impure thoughts about the blacksmith's daughter? That's a sin. Did you eat meat on a Friday? Sin. Did you forget to say grace before choking down your mushroom soup? Triple sin with extra penance. The church is everywhere. It's not just a place you visit on Sundays. It's the spiritual version of an HOA, monitoring your behavior, enforcing confusing rules, and fining you if your soul sticks out too far. You pay tithes, you say prayers, and you pretend not to notice when the priest drinks all the communion wine before Mass starts. Tithing is a treat. 10% of everything you earn, which is nothing, goes straight to the church. If you don't pay, the priest will visit your house with a stern face and an assistant holding a bucket, labeled eternal consequences. You give what you can. Sometimes it's eggs, sometimes it's barley. Once it was your only chicken. You still miss that chicken. In exchange, the church offers salvation, a vague promise that if you behave yourself and endure the misery of life with a slightly less sinful face, you might avoid the fiery eternity that awaits the wicked. There's a lot of focus on that part. The fire, the torment, the demons with barbecue forks. Hell is real, specific, and disturbingly well advertised. Illustrations on the church wall show damned souls writhing in agony, devils prodding them gleefully, and sinners being stuffed into the mouths of dragons, like some kind of demonic conveyor belt. You stare at these images every week. It's like a medieval horror film, with better production values than your actual life. But there's hope. If you confess your sins, say your Hail Marys, and pay a small voluntary donation, you can shave time off your sentence in purgatory. These are indulgences, little get-out-of-hell sooner passes, sold by the church to the devout and the rich. You are neither, so you confess often, hoping that sincerity counts for something. Sin is everywhere. Dancing is frowned upon, unless it's in honor of a saint. Gambling is a sin. Drinking too much is a sin. Swearing is a sin. Thinking about swearing? Sin. You live in a moral minefield where one bad sneeze could lead to eternal torment. Naturally, this means everyone is quietly sinning all the time and pretending otherwise. It's tradition. The village priest is not exactly a paragon of holiness. He owns the nicest house, eats the fattest goose, and occasionally counsels widows in a pastoral way that leaves them blushing, but he also buries the dead, blesses the fields, and listens to your confessions without flinching, even when you admit to fantasizing about eating the tax collector with onions. Religion is also your science, your weather forecast, and your therapist. Drought? God's punishing you. Flood? God's really punishing you. A cow gave birth to a two-headed calf. That's probably Satan, or your neighbor, or both. You consult saints for everything: headaches, lost pigs, marital disputes, boils. There's a saint for every problem, and none of them are returning your calls. Holidays are religious too. Feast days dot the calendar, offering brief, glorious breaks from work, and a reason to drink. But even those are steeped in fear. Eat too much, gluttony. Dance too hard, lust. Skip mass to take a nap, sloth. Basically, if it feels good, it's probably a sin. Even smiling too much is suspicious. Saints didn't smile. They died heroically, or miserably, or both. Confession is your reset button. You kneel, mutter your sins through a wooden screen, and wait for the priest to assign your spiritual homework. Sometimes it's prayers. Sometimes it's fasting. Once he told you to spend a week tending to lepers as a lesson in humility. You nodded, said amen, and immediately went home and cried into a turnip. Still, despite all the judgment and fear, there's comfort in the church. It gives structure, it gives meaning, it makes you feel like the misery isn't random, that it has a purpose, even if that purpose is suffering builds character before paradise. And on the rare occasion the priest says something hopeful, something about love, or mercy, or light, you believe it, even if only for a moment. So yeah, sin is everywhere, salvation is expensive, and the afterlife is basically a medieval lottery, but at least the church is warm in winter. Sort of. Let's talk about the man who owns your soul. your soil, and that one goat you definitely thought was yours. Meet your lord, not the divine one from church, but the very human one who lives in that smug stone manor up the hill. He's got furs, wine, and a dining table that doesn't double as a place to gut fish. You've got calluses and debt. Your relationship with him is simple. He's rich, and you exist to make sure he stays that way. You work his land, raise his animals, and hand over a sizable chunk of your harvest in exchange for the privilege of continuing to breathe on his estate. This is the feudal system, where freedom is mythical, and peasants are basically walking scythes with knees. You don't rent land from your lord. You owe it, like an unpaid student loan that grows barley instead of anxiety. You're bound to the manor, which is medieval legalese for you can't leave. If you want to move, marry, or blink too loudly, you need permission. Think of your lord as your boss, landlord, judge, and part-time deity rolled into one. It's not ideal. He lives in the manor house, a structure so large it casts actual shadows on your potato patch. It has glass windows. Glass. You've never touched glass. You've seen it once, in church, and it made the Virgin Mary look like she had sunburn. Meanwhile, your window is a hole with a rag in it, and your door is a plank that groans louder than your back. Your lord eats meat daily. That's not a typo. Daily. He drinks wine so dark it looks like regret. He sits on chairs with cushions. Cushions, you sit on logs, barrels, or your brother if he's not quick enough. While you're out breaking your spine harvesting his wheat, he's practicing falconry. That's right. He plays with birds. For fun. In return for your labor, your lord provides protection. Sort of. If the village gets raided, he might send help, if the help isn't drunk or late. But mostly, protection means he doesn't personally set fire to your house. He also resolves local disputes. Like when your neighbor accuses your goat of witchcraft, he fines both of you, just to be safe. Let's talk taxes. You pay them in grain, chickens, work hours, and, if you're really unlucky, additional surprise payments called feudal dues. These are owed for things like using the lord's mill, the lord's oven, or the lord's good graces. Want to grind grain in your own hand-cranked bowl? That's illegal. You use his mill, and he takes a share. The bread you bake from it, also taxed. He also claims rights over you. Legal traditions passed down like cursed heirlooms. If your ox dies, you owe him one. If you die, your heir pays a fee to inherit your mud hut. Some lords even claim mercha, a fine your father pays when you marry off your daughter. Why? Because your womb is technically a taxable asset. Breathe that in. Labor service is where things get really spicy. You owe several days a week of free work directly on the lord's land. This includes harvesting, ploughing, fence mending, and any random errand he invents on the spot. Like stand here and look loyal. Forced you do this alongside your regular peasant duties, which means you're farming two lives at once, his and your own, badly. And don't even think about complaining. There's no HR department. There's just the Reeve, who's another peasant but with slightly cleaner boots and a deep, unnatural loyalty to authority. He makes sure everyone shows up, works hard, and doesn't start talking about rebellion. If you slack off, the Reeve tells the bailiff. The bailiff tells the steward tells the lord, and the lord tells the whipping post. Justice. Oh, he's got that too. The lord runs the local manorial court. Crimes include trespassing, not working enough hours, stealing wood from the forest, and insulting your neighbor's cow. You can be fined for any of it. Can't pay? No problem. He'll take your chickens, or your tools, or your dignity. Whichever fits in his satchel. Despite it all, you sort of respect him. He keeps order. He hosts the festival. He sometimes tosses out coins on feast days like a human vending machine full of privilege, and when he rides by on his horse wearing a hat that costs more than your house, you nod, not out of love, but because that's what your neck does when it wants to survive. You've fantasized about telling him off, about saying, I work your land, I raise your food, I built the fence you lean on, but you don't. Because that's the thing about feudalism. It's less of a system and more of a wall, built of tradition, fear, and a complete lack of upward mobility. Sometimes you wonder what it's like to be a lord, to own land, to be carried in a litter instead of hauling hay on your back. You imagine reclining, wine in hand, watching peasants work and thinking, ah yes, productivity. Then you remember you're the one sweating in the field, eating cold beans, and trying not to get arrested for improper scythe posture. But here's the wild part. This isn't even considered cruel. This is the system. The Lord doesn't think he's exploiting you. He thinks he's doing you a favor. After all, without him, you'd have no land, no home, and no one to tax you into the dirt. You should be grateful. And maybe you are? Not because you like it, but because you don't know anything else. The idea of owning land yourself? That's fantasy, like dragons. So, yeah, your lord is rich, and you are, at best, mobile furniture. But hey, at least you're tax deductible. Every now and then, like spotting a double rainbow, or finding a turnip that doesn't look vaguely like a tumor, something magical happens in your miserable medieval existence. A festival. That's right. A real, actual holiday, with music, laughter, questionable beverages, and only a moderate chance of injury. It's like Christmas, if Christmas was sponsored by ale and unresolved trauma. The church calendar is dotted with feast days, saints' days, holy days, harvest festivals, and the occasional "we survived another winter" celebration. The exact reason doesn't matter. No one in your village can read the calendar anyway. The reeve announces it by yelling into the square, "No ploughing tomorrow, bring your shoes." Everyone cheers. Someone weeps. The pig looks suspicious. Festival morning starts with frantic preparations. Your mother stitches your one nice tunic back together with a bit of string, 3 prayers, and the bottom of an old sack. Your sister plaits her hair with rosemary, which is also used to keep away demons and the smell of cow dung. You scrub your hands, splash your face with water that may or may not be from the frog pond, and declare yourself clean. The village green transforms. Flags made from torn rags are strung between trees. Someone drags out a table. Another person appears with a drum. Probably homemade, definitely too loud. There's music, the kind that makes your feet want to move, and your spine file a complaint. It's mostly fiddles, flutes, and someone yelling in rhythm. Art. Dancing happens early, fueled by joy, desperation, and fermented beverages that taste like bread sweat. Men stomp in circles. Women spin in pairs. Children get underfoot and are promptly kicked by accident. It's chaotic, clumsy, and absolutely beautiful. For one brief moment, you forget your knees hurt. You forget your lord exists. You forget that you're legally forbidden from owning more than 2 spoons. The centerpiece of every festival? Ale. Glorious. Flat. Lukewarm ale. It flows like water, because water is dangerous, and it's strong enough to make you forget your name, but weak enough that no one dies unless they fall into the fire. Drinking is not just encouraged, it's practically mandatory. It bonds you with your neighbors, helps you ignore the smell, and softens the memory of burying your second cousin last week. As the day warms, so do the festivities. Someone organizes a wrestling match. Rules are unclear. It involves mud, yelling, and a strong chance of dental rearrangement. There's also a game where you try to climb a greased pole to grab a goose tied to the top. The goose is not thrilled. Neither are you when you land on your cousin Jeff and dislocate your dignity. Food is present, in theory. There's a communal pot of stew, some barley cakes, and a meat pie, so suspiciously aromatic that even the village dog approaches with caution. You eat anyway, because this is the one day you're allowed to pretend you're full. You savor every bite, like it's your last, because it might be, if that pie wasn't pork after all. Street performers, a generous term, appear. A man with painted cheeks swallows a candle. A woman juggles chickens. A pair of brothers stage a mock sword fight with sticks and shout lines from a play no one remembers. You clap, not because it's good, but because it's something else, something not made of mud or debt. Then come the games. Archery contests for the 2 people with a working bow. Sack races. Throw the turnip. Pin the saint on the heretic. Some villagers form a band and perform a ballad about the time the reeve fell in the latrine. It receives thunderous applause. The reeve pretends to smile. Children run wild, covered in soot, berry juice, and existential freedom. Your own offspring are somewhere nearby, probably covered in honey or chasing a duck. You make a mental note to count them before sundown. Probably. As dusk arrives, the festival hits its spiritual peak. The bonfire, a giant heap of sticks, logs, and the occasional broken wheel, is lit ablaze. Sparks fly, shadows dance, and for a few glorious minutes, the fire becomes a portal, a glowing reminder that even in a world full of hardship, beauty still happens. You stand with your family, cheeks warm, hearts lighter, you sway to the music, you exist. There are stories told around the fire, legends of saints, witches, dragons, and that one guy who ate an entire eel and lived. You listen, not because you believe them, but because they're better than silence, better than thinking about tomorrow. Some villagers sneak away behind barns, giggling. Some pass out under carts. The ale has claimed its sacrifices. Somewhere, a fiddle breaks. The goose has escaped. The pig is missing. You suspect those events are related. Eventually the fire dies down. The music fades. People stumble home, arm in arm, shoes in hand. You return to your hut, full of laughter, memories, and more stew than you've had in weeks. Your children are asleep in a pile. Your partner smiles at you for no reason at all, and for a moment, just one moment, life doesn't suck. The next morning, it's back to the fields, back to the mud, the cold, and the endless dance with starvation. But you carry the festival in your bones. You remember the music, the fire, the brief taste of joy. It keeps you going until the next one. So yeah, festivals were loud, dirty, and weird, but they were also magic. The kind of magic that smells like ale and feels like hope. It starts quietly. A cough, a fever, someone's aunt dies in the next village over. Sad, but not shocking. People die all the time in 3048, of hunger, infection, childbirth, bad vibes. You don't panic. Not yet. The priest says it's God testing your faith. The reeve says to keep working. Your mother says to boil your socks. You do all three. Nothing helps. Then the rumors begin. Something's sweeping through the south. People are dropping like flies. Or rather, worse than flies. Because at least flies don't leave behind piles of bloated corpses. They say whole towns are silent. Monks are burning incense, so thick it turns churches into smog clouds. The dead are being buried in pits, not graves. Mass graves. The kind they dig when there aren't enough living hands left to dig proper ones. Still, it feels far away. You keep harvesting, keep praying, keep pretending it's just bad weather and bad luck. Nothing more. Until the merchant shows up. He arrives with a cart of textiles and a mild case of ominous coughing. By the time he leaves, half the village is sick. The tailor's wife, the miller, your neighbour with the extra cow. All bedridden. Within days the cough becomes vomiting, then fever, then swellings, large painful lumps in the armpits, the neck, the groin, bobos. They stink. They ooze. They kill. The priest holds a mass. 20 people show up. 10 can't stop shaking. 1 collapses during communion. The next morning, he's dead. You bury him near the church. 3 more die that same day. The ground is cold and hard. The gravedigger starts sleeping in the church, out of fear. The baker stops baking. No one eats. It spreads fast, like wind, or fear, or divine punishment on horseback. Some think it's the Jews, poisoning wells. Others say it's a comet, or sin, or a test. The physician, who usually deals in leeches and guesswork, has no answers. He burns herbs, bleeds patients, prays. They still die. You try to avoid it. You wear a pouch of garlic around your neck. Your grandmother smears ash on the doorframe. Your cousin swears bathing will make it worse, and refuses to wash for 3 straight weeks, which to be fair is about 2 weeks longer than usual. One morning your younger brother is quiet. Too quiet, he has a fever. By nightfall, he can't stand. You try everything. Water, prayers, onion poultices. Nothing works. He dies before sunrise, curled beneath the same blanket you both slept under last winter. You don't cry. There's no time. The village changes. Laughter disappears. So do people. Houses are boarded up. Entire families vanish overnight. You stop counting how many funerals you've been to. The priest rings the church bell for the dead until his hands bleed. Then he gets sick. Then he dies. Your family burns herbs in the hearth. The smoke makes your eyes water. But it's better than the smell, that cloying, sweet rot of bodies kept too long in closed rooms. You bury them in the fields now. There aren't enough priests left to say the words. You say them yourself, with a voice that cracks but doesn't break. Not yet. Food becomes scarce. The baker is dead. The reeve is dead. The fields go untended. No one trades. No one travels. You boil barley in silence. You eat in silence. You wake in silence, waiting to see who's still breathing. Some villagers flee. They run to the woods, the hills, the next village over, hoping it hasn't reached there yet. Some die on the road. Some return days later, eyes hollow, muttering about empty towns and corpses stacked like firewood. No one listens anymore. Listening is dangerous. There's a man in town who claims to have the cure. He wears a beaked mask filled with herbs, a long black robe, and leather gloves. He looks like a nightmare summoned by a sadistic bird. He walks from house to house, pokes at the sick, and mutters about bad air. The sick keep dying. He eventually leaves. Or maybe he dies. You're not sure. He stops showing up. That's usually the same thing. One evening, you look around your home. Your partner is sleeping. Finally, your eldest is watching the door. Your youngest is not there. You check under blankets, behind the hearth, outside in the cold. Then you find them, curled under the table, still and pale. You sit beside them for a long time. No prayers, no words, just the sound of the fire and your own heartbeat, reminding you that, for now, you're still here. Somewhere, a dog howls. The night feels heavier than usual. You lie awake, not because you're afraid of dying, but because you're afraid of waking up to more absence, to more names you can't say without your throat closing. And yet, somehow, the sun still rises. You bury your child the next day. You dig with frozen fingers, lips cracked, back aching. You wrap them in linen, place a sprig of rosemary beside their cheek, and whisper a lullaby you barely remember learning. Then you cover them with earth and walk home with mud on your hands, and a silence that never leaves. No one tells you it's almost over. There's no announcement, no parade. One day, the deaths slow, the coughs fade, people start to talk again. A laugh breaks out. You stare at the sound like it's a wild animal. Unfamiliar, dangerous, beautiful. You survived? Somehow. So yeah, the Black Death arrived, and it was everything the whispers promised. And worse. But you're still here. And in this world, that's everything. You're coughing again. Not the polite kind of cough. The kind that rattles deep in your lungs and brings up something you're fairly sure is not supposed to be green. You're dizzy, sweating, and your left armpit has developed a lump the size of a walnut. In short, it's time to see a medical professional. Unfortunately, it's 3048, and professional is a strong word. Your village physician, if he exists at all, is not so much a doctor as he is a confident guesser with a flair for theatrics. His toolkit includes a jar of leeches, a knife, a flask of something he swears is medicinal wine, and a heavy book written in Latin that he cannot read. He arrives wearing robes, a hat too large for his head, and an expression of mild panic. You're in good hands. The diagnosis begins with observation. He sniffs the air around you, asks when you last bathed. You lie, and checks your pulse by squeezing your wrist like he's trying to juice it. Then comes the theory. Your humors are out of balance. That's right, humor. According to the wisdom of ancient Greeks who lived centuries before indoor plumbing, your body is made of 4 fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health, in theory, is a delicate game of goo-based Tetris. You clearly have too much of something. The answer? Bloodletting. You lie down on a wooden bench while he selects his favorite blade, a small, rusty knife he calls Old Reliable. He ties a rope around your arm, mutters a blessing, and makes a quick incision. Blood trickles out, slow at first, then faster. You go pale. He nods approvingly. That's the illness leaving your body, and maybe some of your soul. When the blood slows, he bandages you with linen that might have once been clean and suggests rest. You spend the next day feeling like a boiled rag and still coughing. He returns, puzzled. Time for leeches? Yes, leeches. Small, squishy vampires harvested from a swamp and sold in leather pouches. He places 3 on your chest. They latch on, squirming with delight, and begin to drink. You gag. He calls it progress. Other treatments are offered. A herbal poultice made of onion, garlic, and stale beer. A steam bath with rosemary and mint. You sit in a wooden tub while someone boils water over a fire and pours it in slowly, careful not to cook you alive. It doesn't help, but your skin feels vaguely less filthy. There's a chant involved too. The village healer, not to be confused with the physician, visits with a string of beads and a pouch of crushed bones. She sings in a dialect no one understands, and smokes out your house with burning sage. Your headache intensifies. She tells you it's the demons leaving. You hope she's right. Some villagers swear by urine. They drink it, rub it on wounds, use it to balance the spirit. Others believe in animal parts, powdered deer antler, frog skin, roasted snail shells. One woman claims burying a dead toad in your garden prevents the plague. Another says placing a live chicken against your bubo draws out the poison. The chicken disagrees. You try them all. Nothing works. Because, spoiler, medieval medicine isn't medicine. It's vibes, superstition, and the stubborn belief that if you burn enough herbs and say enough Hail Marys, maybe God will get bored and let you live. Hospitals exist, technically run by monks, full of beds, prayers, and the occasional bath. But they're not for curing. They're for dying politely. You lie there surrounded by groaning strangers as a monk reads scripture and feeds you broth. The walls are covered in crucifixes and despair. It smells like wet stone and disappointment. The real miracle. Some people recover. Somehow, their fever breaks, the swellings shrink, and they stagger out of bed, blinking like confused moles. No one knows why. The physician claims credit. The healer winks. God shrugs. After your second round of bloodletting, and a failed attempt at herbal purgation, a fancy phrase for violent diarrhea, you start to improve. Slowly, you breathe easier. You stand without swooning. Your mother cries. Your cousin steals your last leech, just in case. You've survived. Which means, according to local logic, that the treatment worked. Never mind that your survival was probably dumb luck, and a strong constitution built from years of eating moldy bread. Medicine gets the credit. Which means next time someone sneezes, the cycle starts all over again. You return to work, pale and tired, with a small scar on your arm and a new distrust of frogs. The physician tips his hat and disappears. The healer leaves you a jar of fermented garlic water for strength. You consider drinking it. You don't, but you do reflect. People mean well. They want to help. They burn herbs, chant psalms, rub oils, and whisper spells because doing something feels better than doing nothing. In a world without science, certainty, or even basic hygiene, belief is medicine, hope is a salve, and sometimes, just sometimes, it's enough. So yeah, medieval medicine was witchcraft with extra steps, but it was all you had. And somehow, you're still here. You never thought your life would revolve around shovels. And yet here you are, ankle deep in half-frozen soil, hands blistered, back screaming, digging a hole that's exactly the size of someone you loved. There's no time to cry. No one brings flowers. This isn't a ceremony. It's logistics. The grave is for your cousin. Or maybe your aunt. You stopped counting names. 2 weeks ago, the bodies keep coming, and the village priest is long dead. So now you dig, bury, and move on, because there's always another. The ground is uncooperative. In spring it's mud. In summer it's dust. In winter it's rock. You learn to sharpen your shovel. You learn the best angles. You learn that the smell clings to you, under your nails, in your hair, in your dreams. You learn to work fast. The flies are always watching. There's no room left in the churchyard. The sacred ground is full. You've begun burying people in the fields, behind hedgerows near the edge of the forest where no one goes. Some villagers mutter about spirits. Others just keep digging. Superstition is a luxury you can't afford. You lower the body gently, or as gently as your strength allows. There's no coffin, just cloth, a blanket, a tunic, an old sack. You say a few words, or nothing at all. There's a silence between shovel strikes that says more than any prayer. Then the dirt goes in, one scoop at a time. It's not just death that wears you down. It's the rhythm, the routine. Dig, bury, grieve, repeat. Your hands are calloused, your arms ache, and your soul feels like someone's been scrubbing it with sand. You don't even flinch anymore when someone collapses in the road. You start helping other families. Not out of charity, but out of necessity. No one should have to bury their child alone. You lift the body, hold the mother's hand, and dig another grave, next to the last one. Then another, and another. Rows of anonymous mounds growing like some twisted crop. The worst are the small ones. Children wrapped in linen, eyes closed, cheeks still round. You dig extra shallow because it's all they need. That fact alone breaks you. Not the smell, not the weight, just how little space they take up. There's a moment one evening when you find yourself humming while digging. A tune your mother used to sing while baking bread. You stop, stare at your hands, realize you've gone numb, emotionally, not just physically. That scares you more than the death. You try not to think too much, but your mind wanders. What did this? God? A punishment? A test? Or is the world just chaos in a bad disguise? You don't have answers, just dirt under your fingernails and too many ghosts. Your partner still sleeps beside you, curled small. Your surviving children eat in silence. Everyone's thinner. You ration food. You ration words. Even laughter has been tucked away like an heirloom too delicate to use. Every cough makes your heart stutter. You've buried neighbors, friends, your teacher, a boy you once kissed behind the chapel. You didn't think it would matter, but it does. You remember his laugh, the way he always whistled when nervous. He's gone now. The world feels quieter without him. Sometimes, in the evenings, you walk through the graves. You whisper names to the mounds. Light a candle, if you have one. You talk to them like they're still there, because in some strange way, they are. Their shoes sit by the hearth. Their hairpins rest in the corner. Their stories live in your bones. Not everyone copes like you. Some drink, some run, some scream at nothing. One man lit his own house on fire. He stood in the road, watching it burn, while cradling a child too still to sleep. No one stopped him. No one spoke. We just watched. Every so often someone survives. They stand at the edge of a fresh grave, blinking in the smoke-hazed dawn, unsure whether to feel relieved or guilty. You place a hand on their shoulder, say nothing. It's enough. There's no more wood for crosses. You mark the graves with stones, sticks, or sometimes just memory. You've taken to carving symbols into bark, a sun for a child, a star for a mother, a circle for those who died alone. It's not much, but it's something, a small rebellion against forgetting. One night you dream of digging a grave so deep it opens into a new world, one without pain, or hunger, or plague, just light and silence. You wake up covered in sweat and guilt, because part of you didn't want to wake up at all, but you do. You always do. Because someone has to feed the chickens, milk the goat, boil the water, because your youngest still wants you to sing. Because survival isn't just staying alive, it's remembering why. You don't know when it ends. One day, you notice fewer coughs, more birdsong, the child laughs. You flinch at the sound, then smile. It's jarring, beautiful, terrifying. You check the graveyard, no new mounds, for now. So yeah, you dug graves for people you loved, with hands that shook and eyes that blurred. And somehow, you're still here, standing, breathing, remembering. That matters. You wake up one morning, expecting more death. Instead you get silence. Not the heavy, grief-choked kind that has haunted your village for months. This silence is lighter, confused. A strange emptiness, where panic used to live. You sit up, waiting for the next scream, the next bell toll, the next cart of bodies. But it doesn't come. The plague didn't leave a note when it packed its bags. It didn't say goodbye or offer closure. It just faded, slowly, inconsistently, like a fire running out of fuel. 1 week, the deaths slow. The next, they stop. You don't celebrate. Not yet. You just breathe. Carefully, suspiciously. Then you notice something even stranger. No one's working the fields. It's not just your village. Word spreads, in the way things always do when you've got no newspapers, no mail, and a gossiping shepherd with incredible range. Across the country, labourers are gone. Entire villages are abandoned. In some places there are more cows than people. which sounds charming until you realize the cows are now outvoting you. With so many dead, the feudal machine starts to wheeze. The gears grind, the math doesn't work. The lord walks out of his manor, expecting 10 peasants to harvest his grain, and finds 3, 2 of whom are children, and 1 who is asleep under a wheelbarrow. For once you are in short supply. And that, dear serf, is power. The remaining peasants begin to realize something wild. They're valuable, not spiritually, economically. Landowners are desperate. They offer higher wages, better food, actual coin. Peasants begin to move, legally or not, to wherever the deal is best. The lords are horrified. It's like their favorite tools started asking for lunch breaks. You start hearing talk in the alehouse. That village over the hills paying a whole groat a day. A groat. An actual silver coin. You've never held one. You've only seen them in the lord's tax chest, nestled among gold bits and lies. The idea that you could earn one just for existing somewhere else. Madness. Except, it's happening. It's not rebellion. Not yet. It's just bargaining. Quiet shifts. Little negotiations. A reeve agrees to shorter workdays. A steward overlooks a missing tithe. A priest mumbles forgiveness for the sin of ambition. No one says it out loud, but you feel it. Something is changing. The king, of course, is not pleased. He passes laws. The Statute of Labourers arrives in 3051, declaring that no man shall demand higher wages than before the plague, that everyone must stay in their place, that feudalism shall continue, uninterrupted. It's adorable, really. The Black Death just murdered half the kingdom. And the king thinks a strongly worded scroll will scare you more. But the damage is done, not just to the population, but to the system. The labour shortage empowers the powerless. Serfs walk off estates. Some pretend to be free men and get away with it. Some rent land. Some start asking questions like, why can't I own this myself? Radical, yes, but less so when there's no one around to stop you. Markets shift. Landowners try to entice labourers with perks. More land, better homes, lighter taxes. For the first time in your life, you might have options. Not dreams, not fantasies, actual choices. Do you stay with your lord and milk his cows for free, or do you take your pitchfork down the road and see who's hiring? It's not utopia, not even close. You're still poor. You're still covered in boils, memories, and the faint smell of despair. But something's cracked. The iron cage of serfdom, so tight, so absolute, suddenly has a hinge, a creak, a gap. The nobility sees it too. They panic. Some try to lock down their estates with tighter laws. Others lash out, blaming their misfortunes on divine punishment, on sinners, on foreigners. But no law can resurrect the dead, and no prayer can rebind the peasant who has tasted possibility. In your village, things shift subtly. The lord loses 3 families to the next town over. He replaces them with tenants, free men who pay rent instead of labour. The reeve starts being polite. You get a second bowl of stew on feast days. A child in the village learns to write. The priest doesn't call it heresy. You save a few coins. Not many, but enough to matter. Enough to feel the weight of your own labour in your pocket. You begin to imagine a different kind of life. A hut with more than one room. A field that's yours. A winter without hunger. The world isn't ending, just the version you knew. And that's terrifying, because change is risky, unstable. But also, it's a crack of light through the boarded-up window. A glimmer of maybe. And after everything you've seen, the death, the grief, the silence, maybe that's enough. So yeah, the plague nearly ended the world, but it also broke the chains. Not all of them. Not forever, but just enough to matter. You've spent your life being told where to go, what to grow, and how much of it you're allowed to keep. You've knelt for blessings, bowed to landlords, and paid taxes with chickens. You've buried friends, survived famine, endured plague, and now that things might finally be turning, the nobility wants to pretend nothing happened. No thank. It's been a few years since the Black Death. You're still dirt poor, but you're no longer blind to the absurdity of it all. Lords are struggling to fill their manors. Peasants are trading labour for money. Money and even, in some cases, negotiate. You, a serf, just haggled with a steward and walked away with boots that have both soles. But then, the king passes another law. More statutes, more decrees. Wages must return to pre-plague levels, says the parchment. Movement between manors is illegal again. Taxes are going up, again, and someone named John of Gaunt is collecting them with all the subtlety of a drunk boor in a pottery shop. Enter the final straw. In 1381, 33 years after the plague first arrived, the government imposes a third poll tax in 4 years, flat rate. Everyone pays the same, no matter how poor, even your cousin Agnes, who eats moss, even your half-blind neighbour who thinks the moon is a potato, everyone. And you've had enough. Word spreads fast. A man named Wat Tyler is stirring up trouble in Kent. Another named John Ball is preaching sermons that sound suspiciously like revolution. When Adam delved and Eve span, he says, who was then the gentleman? Translation: God didn't invent landlords. People did, and people can uninvent them. You nod along. Hard. Villages begin to rise. Not just in Kent. Across England. You grab your pitchfork. Not because you know what you're doing, but because you're done doing nothing. A crowd forms. Then a mob. Then a movement. You march toward London. Voices raised. Banners high. Feet blistering in solidarity. You're not alone. Tens of thousands join you. Peasants, craftsmen, labourers, even some low-ranking clergy. It's not just about taxes anymore. It's about being seen, heard, respected. For the first time, the kingdom feels like it belongs to people, not just names in castles. Along the way you burn tax records, destroy manorial rolls. That bit of parchment that said you belonged to Lord Watch's name. Gone. Bonfire. History. You break into manors and discover rooms larger than your entire house. Chairs with cushions. Food just sitting there. No mold. No rats, just meat. You take it. Not out of greed, but because you've been hungry since you were 6. The rebels reach London. The gates open, not with force, but fear. The city watches as peasants flood the streets. The elite tremble. The king, Richard II, is just 14. He agrees to meet. Promises are made. Serfdom will be abolished. Wages will rise. All will be forgiven. You want to believe him. Wat Tyler steps forward to speak. Confident. Hopeful. And then, he's dead. Cut down by the Lord Mayor. Just like that. One swing, one betrayal, and the dream begins to bleed. The crowd gasps. Confusion. Chaos. The king, with all the poise of someone who's never worked a day in his life, declares he'll personally be everyone's lord. A poetic gesture. And an empty one. The rebellion collapses. Some go home. Some are arrested. Some are hanged. Publicly, painfully. You survive. Barely. You return to your village with bruised ribs, cracked hopes, and a quiet fire still burning behind your eyes. The revolt failed, but it also didn't, because something did change. The king never keeps his promises. Of course not, but the fear lingers. The nobility realizes just how thin the walls are, just how fragile control becomes when the people, the peasants, stop obeying. Feudalism doesn't collapse overnight, but it starts to wobble. Years pass. You still farm, still pay taxes, but you're not the same. None of you are. Serfs begin demanding contracts, wages, freedoms. Some lords agree, others don't. But the tide has turned. A few peasants buy their freedom outright. A few more just walk away. You keep the memory alive. Not just of Wat Tyler or John Ball, but of that feeling, the power of standing together, of marching, of saying no. You whisper it to your children. Tell them about the day London listened, about the moment the crown bent, even for a breath. You teach them how to read a contract, how to measure a field, how to ask questions. And you keep your pitchfork. Not just for hay, but just in case. So yeah, the rebellion failed. But it also left a crack in the foundation. And one day, through that crack, something better might grow. Let's stop squinting at the big picture and zoom in right down into the boots, or what's left of them, of a single human life. Meet Tom. No title, no surname, just Tom. A peasant born of peasants, in a village with no name worth remembering. He never travelled more than 5 miles from his front door, but within that circle of mud and memory, a whole world unfolded. Tom was born during a thunderstorm. His mother always said he came out yelling at the clouds, as if offended by the weather. His first toy was a stick. His second was a slightly nicer stick. He spent his early years barefoot, coated in soot, happily chasing chickens, until he realized those chickens would one day be dinner. He learned to walk early, mostly because crawling put his face too close to manure. By 5 he was helping in the garden. By 7 he was hauling water. By 9 he'd already developed the quiet resignation of someone who knew his future involved a plough, sore knees, and very little cheese. But Tom wasn't dull. He noticed things. He remembered which fields flooded first. He could predict frost from the way the crows flew. And he knew how to make a fire with damp wood and a lot of muttered swearing. In short, he was useful. And in 14th century England, being useful was the closest thing to job security you could get. At 15, Tom married a girl named Ellen who laughed like thunder and swore like a reeve. She could thatch a roof, trap a rabbit, and once knocked out a travelling peddler with a jug of spoiled ale after he insulted her soup. Tom thought she was magnificent. Their wedding feast included half a chicken, 2 onions, and a priest who didn't quite finish the ceremony before being sick behind a tree. It was perfect. They built a life. Not a grand one. There were no stone halls or embroidered pillows, but a life made of rhythm. Mornings started with bread, evenings ended with firelight, and in between came sweat, soil, and the occasional goat-related crisis. Children arrived, loud and muddy and sticky. Tom taught them how to weed. Ellen taught them how to swear appropriately near clergy. Then came the Black Death. Tom buried his father, his sister, and 2 of his children. He dug the graves himself. He didn't speak for a week. Ellen held him through it, through the coughing, the silence, the nights when the wind felt like ghosts. They came out the other side, changed, not broken, not whole, just different. The village was half empty, so was Tom, but there was still barley to plant, still roofs to mend, still children to raise. He watched as the world shifted, as lords began offering coin instead of commands, as peasants walked away from manors and toward towns with strange names and stranger customs. Tom didn't leave. He stayed, not because he was loyal, but because he believed things could be better there too. He asked for wages. Got them. He fixed a fence for a steward and earned enough to buy a new axe. He repaired the church roof and was paid with a goose and 3 coppers. He taught his son how to write numbers on a slate. Tom couldn't read, but he knew value when he saw it. He heard rumours of rebellion, men with pitchforks marching on London. Tom didn't go, not because he was afraid, but because he had things to fix. A roof to patch, a neighbour to help, a child to bury again. Ellen held his hand through it all. Then one winter, she didn't wake up. Tom didn't cry, not where people could see. He just sat by the fire, staring at the place she used to sit. The next day he got up, fed the animals, stirred the pottage. Life didn't pause for grief. It trudged forward, mud and all. In his later years, Tom became something rare, respected, not feared, not powerful, just listened to. The younger villagers asked him how to rotate crops, how to fix tools, how to keep going when everything fell apart. He didn't have speeches, just stories, and hands that had done the work. He died in his sleep, old by peasant standards, nearly 60. They buried him near the edge of the field he worked most of his life. Not a church grave, just a spot under an oak tree where the soil was soft and the sun hit in the morning. There was no sermon, just a few words from a friend, a silence, and a handful of barley seeds scattered on the earth. Later that spring, the patch bloomed green. Quiet, steady, alive. Tom never held a title, never owned land, never saw a city or wrote a book, but he fed people, raised a family, fixed roofs and fences and broken spirits. He lived through plague, hunger, and heartbreak, and still found time to whistle on foggy mornings. So yeah, just one peasant, one name, one story in a field full of forgotten ones. And that's enough. You'd think a catastrophe that killed up to half of Europe's population would have left nothing but ashes and sadness. And sure, there were plenty of both. But strangely, like a particularly horrible compost heap, something began to grow out of the decay. Not roses, exactly, but ideas, shifts, cracks in the walls of medieval life that, over time, widened into doors. Let's start with the obvious: labour. You know, that thing peasants had been doing thanklessly since before they had shoes. Suddenly it had value. After the Black Death thinned out the workforce, those left behind realized that being alive was, economically speaking, a serious bargaining chip. Not out of generosity, of course, just scarcity. The landlord needed his fields ploughed, and there were only so many healthy backs left. So peasants began to negotiate for wages, for better treatment, for the ability to move around and find work where they liked. Did this make the nobility thrilled? Absolutely not. They wrote angry laws about it. But over the next century, serfdom started to rot like an old turnip. Slowly, unevenly, but unmistakably. Then came the towns. Before the plague, cities were congested, filthy, and, well, they stayed that way. But with more people moving around, fleeing abandoned villages or chasing better pay, urban life swelled. Markets grew, guilds flourished. The smell, still bad, but now it came with a side of opportunity. Education, weirdly, also got a boost. Fewer mouths to feed meant some families could afford to send a son to school. Monasteries and universities, hit hard by deaths, scrambled to fill roles. That meant new people in old places. And when new people enter old systems, things start to shift. They ask annoying questions. Like, what if we taught medicine based on observation instead of medieval guesswork? Why? Even religion changed. Slowly, painfully. The church, which had claimed to hold all the answers, had failed to stop the plague. That left some folks skeptical. Maybe God was angry, or maybe the clergy didn't know what they were doing. Either way, whispers of reform began to echo, not enough to break the church, but enough to plant seeds of doubt, the kind that would later bloom into full-blown reformation. Art got darker, literature more reflective. People started painting death, literally. Skeletons dancing with kings, corpses reminding viewers of mortality. It was morbid. It was dramatic. It was basically the medieval version of an Instagram account called Vintage Doom. But it also meant people were thinking about life, death, and what came after. Even the idea of individual worth began to shift. Before, your identity was mostly who your lord said you were. But surviving the plague, that made people rethink things. The concept of personal resilience, of surviving in spite of everything, it started to matter. Quietly. Not with fanfare, but it mattered. Let's not over-romanticize it. The years after 1348 weren't some Enlightenment festival with music and healing crystals. They were messy, violent, full of setbacks. And for every tiny step forward, there were still 3 people accusing their neighbor of witchcraft. But the changes stuck. And over time, they lay. Peasant revolts, inspired in part by the new awareness of economic leverage, became harder to ignore. Towns kept growing. Trade expanded. Political systems had to adjust. Slowly, the rigid class structures of medieval Europe began to soften. Not collapse, but shift. And all of it, the bargaining, the movement, the awareness, can trace part of its root system back to the Black Death. It's the ugliest possible origin story. A tragedy so massive it broke the machine just enough to let in some light. And yeah, that's a hard truth to swallow. That so much human progress came lurching out of such horror. But maybe that's the story of history, over and over. Crisis cracks the walls, and something unexpected crawls through. Sometimes it's awful. Sometimes it's art. Sometimes it's a farmer asking for better wages, and accidentally kicking off centuries of social change. So the next time you wash your hands with soap, go to a city market, or get paid for your labor instead of being told it's an honor to serve. Thank very reluctantly a 14th century bacterium. And then thank the people who survived it, who didn't get monuments, who didn't write books, but who kept going anyway, because what we inherited from the plague years isn't just a shift in labor laws, or a fancy new town charter, it's resilience. It's the memory, however faint, of ordinary people rebuilding something from rubble. Not because they had a plan, but because they had to. That matters. Let's get uncomfortably honest for a second. You, sitting there in your heated room, with clean socks and a flushable toilet, would you have survived 3048? Like, actually. It's a fun hypothetical until you remember the part where you're born directly onto a bed of straw that doubles as a toilet and triples as a home for mysterious insects. There's no Netflix, no grocery stores, no real concept of weekends. Your skincare routine involves hoping the pond isn't frozen. So let's break it down. Could you carry buckets of water, ice cold, sloshing, bone-aching buckets from the well to your home 4 times a day? Before breakfast, could you tend a fire that never quite warms your fingers, cook soup out of a turnip, and wishful thinking, and still have the energy to scrub your one shirt in river sludge? Could you bury your own child? Because odds are, you'd have to. Infant mortality rates were brutal. 1 in 3 didn't survive past 5. And if that sentence didn't hit you like a punch to the soul, read it again. 1 in 3. Still feeling tough? Maybe you make it to adulthood. Congratulations. Now you get to work in the fields. Sunrise to sunset, no coffee, just grit. Your boots are made of hope and regret. Your reward, gruel. A pat on the head, and maybe, if you're lucky, a church sermon about how suffering makes you holy. There's no escape pod. No career pivot. You can't become an influencer. You are influenced by frost, famine, and the occasional lord who fines you for stealing wood from the forest you were born next to. Your teeth rot. Your knees go early. You develop a persistent cough in winter, and a mysterious rash in summer. There's no doctor. There's Marjorie, who knows which herbs might help, and which ones might make your hair fall out. But she's already on thin ice with the priest. You find ways to cope. You hum while working. You joke with neighbours. You pretend not to notice when your ceiling leaks again. You sneak a sip of ale and feel human for 10 minutes. And when your baby laughs for the first time, really laughs, it's better than any holiday or paycheck or spa weekend you'll ever know. You hold on to that. But then the plague comes. And suddenly, everyone's coughing. Your neighbour dies. Your friend. Your child. You dig more graves than you ever thought possible. The village bell tolls until the rope snaps. And still, you go on. You patch the roof. Mend the fence. Share your food with the widow next door, even though you're starving too. You braid your daughter's hair even though you know the fever's already taken her. You whisper prayers, or curses, or nothing, because sometimes silence is all you have left. Could you do that? Not just physically, though let's be clear, medieval peasant life was a full-body, CrossFit hellscape. But emotionally? Could you hold grief and duty in the same hand? Could you survive not just once, but again and again, every time the world knocked you flat? Let's not pretend we're made of lesser stuff now. Modern people endure their own catastrophes, wars, illness, loss. We carry trauma and fear, often quietly, beneath polished surfaces. But there's something about medieval survival that strips everything down to the bones. Eat, work, endure, no buffer, no distraction, just breath, cold and visible in the morning. It makes you wonder, not just, would I have survived, but would I have kept my soul intact? Would I have found moments of joy between the bleakness? Would I have helped my neighbours instead of turning inward? Would I have sung, danced, celebrated anything, even in the face of death? Because they did. Not all of them. Not every day. But enough. Enough to pass on songs and customs and recipes and sarcastic folktales. Enough to teach their children how to live when it's hard. How to smile with half their teeth missing and mud on their faces. That's not just survival, that's defiance. So, would you have made it? It's easy to say no, to picture yourself curling into a ball at the first frost, or crying over your first rat-infested loaf of bread. But then again, maybe you'd surprise yourself. Maybe you'd find strength in calloused hands and routine. Maybe your love would grow fiercer, your friendships deeper, your small joys more precious. Maybe survival isn't about muscle or stamina or cleverness. Maybe it's about stubbornness. The sheer audacity to wake up one more day and do it again, no matter how heavy it gets. And if that's the test, maybe you'd pass after all. History rarely pauses for peasants. It's too busy name-dropping kings and cataloguing wars, obsessing over castles and coronations like a medieval gossip column. But while the nobles were jousting, scheming, and occasionally dying in bizarre hunting accidents, someone else was keeping the world turning one muddy footstep at a time. This chapter isn't about the famous. It's about the forgotten. The peasants, those millions of ordinary humans who lived, worked, suffered and died with no fanfare. They didn't write the chronicles, but they built the roads. They didn't wear crowns, but they grew the grain that fed the people who did. Their fingerprints are everywhere, just not in the history books. And that's the point. These were people who endured without applause, who rebuilt homes after fires, fields after floods, and families after funerals, who gave their children better odds than they'd had, who kept showing up every frostbitten morning to do the kind of labor that no one ever thanked them for. Peasants didn't shape history with declarations or manifestos. They shaped it by existing generation after generation, like stones in a wall, quiet, unshakable, holding everything together, even when no one noticed. And here's what's wild. Their lives mattered. They mattered because they formed the backbone of every kingdom. Because even kings can't rule if no one grows the food. Because behind every shiny bit of historical drama, there were hundreds of Tom-like figures tilling soil, birthing children, whispering prayers, and holding their breath as the plague cart rolled by. You don't need to be remembered to be significant. That's the quiet legacy of ordinary people. It's in the techniques passed from Kilo's hand to Koryu's hand. How to weave a basket that won't collapse. How to plant onions that won't rot. How to mend a wound without magic. It's in the lullabies that survived wars, sung in soot-dark cottages while the world outside raged. It's in the stubborn hope it takes to keep planting seeds when you don't know if spring will come. And yes, the world has changed. We have antibiotics now, running water, Yelp reviews. But the essence of survival, that's ancient. That's peasant-born. We still lean on quiet people, the ones who show up, who work through grief, who care for others while carrying their own weight, who aren't flashy, but without whom everything would collapse. You may never hear their names, but you feel their legacy every time your world crumbles, and you get up anyway. Every time you choose kindness when it's hard. Every time you patch something broken, even if it's just your own heart. So here's to the nameless. To the mothers who rocked babies through plagues. To the fathers who taught sons how to swing a hammer, not a sword. To the daughters who carried water with cracked hands and sang anyway. To the sons who buried their kin and still found reasons to laugh by firelight. Their legacy isn't loud. It's not carved in stone or sung in ballads. But it's real. It's in us. Because whether you've ever milked a goat or not, whether you'd last a day in 1348, or crumble at the first cold breeze, you carry their endurance somewhere deep in your bones. That stubborn flame that whispers, not today, not yet, one more step, that's the real inheritance. So let history have its castles. Let the books drone on about treaties and royal drama. We'll remember the people who patched the roofs, grew the food, raised the babies, and walked through fire without ever asking to be remembered. They didn't need fame. They needed each other. A bowl of stew, a fire that didn't go out, and maybe, just maybe, someone in the future to whisper, I see you, I remember. And now, you do. Let that sink in. If you're still awake or still alive, you've survived 3048. Congrats. Now do something heroic. Subscribe. It's free, unlike your medieval taxes. And it helps us keep digging through history's weirdest, darkest, and most underrated stories. Until next time, sleep tight, and avoid fleas.